So we gathered together a few folks from different backgrounds to discuss a little bit about the usage of AI and its implication in the clinical research. So moderating the discussion, we're gonna have someone you guys are already familiar with, Ras, will be moderating this discussion. I would like to invite Pascal Brabant, Senior Director, Clinical Operations and Business Development for Keyrus Life Science. Rabi Razgala, VP Business Development and Operations for Dasma. And Jason Bishop, Senior AI Solutions Consultant for Click.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Let's just jump right into it. So I'm going to take a seat. Are there any questions from the audience before we get into it? So far, so good. Okay. I mean, let's talk about introductions to AI in the pharma, its impact so far. Robbie, can you briefly describe how AI is currently being utilized, at what you've seen, and particularly around clinical research and trials?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the assistance. Actually, as you already said, the AI is searching itself. What the potential that we can have from the development of this technology. It's like the Paulo Coelho author, The Alchemist. So we are at the first step of the journey of this. So far we have some experience that we noted from the field, from pharma industry. And basically, we have several areas where AI can be can have a very important and impactful purposes. So far, the drug design pointed. This is, I think, the main objective of big pharma and pharma in general, because as we can see in all over the world, we are at the edge of innovation in terms of therapeutics. So discovering new drugs will be the most exciting thing, to provide the new personalized medicines, but also to repurpose the drugs already existing in the market. So AI can probably look at the different patients' profiles, specifically within the small groups, and to find whether well-known molecules can be reallocated for new indications. So this is very interesting because this will help in terms of pharmacoeconomics to reshape the landscape of the pharma using our already existing drugs. But also AI will start to change and to modify the clinical research also field. Specifically, as you mentioned, the chatbots and learning agents for drafting documents, drafting protocols, researching information from the internet, because the information is already available there. But so far, we need maybe to work on more deeper projects where we can use the data of patients to innovate in new approaches. For example, for the patient recruitment, improving the compliance of subjects participating in trials, maybe anticipating also the recruitment of subjects by identifying disease at early stage before even being eligible to any clinical trial. And we have also another, I think, the third focus of the AI on the workflow, the process of all the pharma sector, from the idea of having a drug, so all the manufacturing, the R&D development, manufacturing of the product, but also going to the field. So all this the process of innovating, producing, collaboration, coordinating between agencies, between institutions with clinical research organization also will be subject also of AI innovations. So far, I think for the pharma industry, so far, I think these are the most significant achievements so far. But let's say we are at the first step of the road.
Those are three pillars, I think, that I also think about when I think of how AI and analytics can be used. Do you think there's a specific area where there's really significant advancements being made currently in any of those three areas?
Yeah, so because we need to split the talk. Are we talking about a pharma industry in terms of drug management or drug design, or the management of clinical trials? Because those are two different topics. They have different objectives. So maybe from the life science, from the clinical trials perspective, I think we have started already by capturing the data at the remotely at the level of the patient. So now the decentralized clinical trials are now getting more and more market size in terms of because these kind of projects have several opportunities and advantages, not only in terms of reducing the cost of the trial, but also providing more opportunity in terms of patient recruitment, etc. And in terms of pharma, I think I already discussed with Brigitte earlier. I think we have already one drug already in the early stages of clinical trials. I think in phase 1 or phase 2. It was designed by bioinformatics in 11 months exactly. Generally and usually we design new drugs at least 10 years, and we spend over $5 million US dollars to provide at least one candidate for the clinical trials. It was done by In Silico Medicine. I think it's an American company. And they innovated in a new drug for the kidney disease or specific kidney disease based on several bioinformatics and specifically using the AI. So this is a real exciting thing because we now have phase 1 study started with an agent designed by AI. But so far, as you said, we are still at the stage of POC, MVPs. So we are working, I think, very deep to try to find real application. And the challenge in this exercise is how to gather the different experts around the table to work together on the same project, because it's very difficult to have a clinician, to have a specialty in clinical trials, a specialty in drug design, but also very expert and have great knowledge in designing AI.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, you're making me miss my physics days. Part of my research was helping build those models to do drug design. But we weren't using AI. We're using molecular dynamics. But Pascal, I mean, what are some of the benefits and challenges, or have you personally seen AI, used in your line of work, being, on the tactical side of clinical trials and research?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think in regards to clinical operations, we're really at the beginning. What we're seeing from AI right now into clinical trials is more a specific vendor that will come with an application that includes AI. I think looking at a global usage of AI in a clinical trial, I think we're a little bit away from that. And I think, as you said before, finding the person that will gap the bridge between people that know what AI is and what clinical operations or running clinical trials need, I think that's going to be the key element here, is to finding a partner that has both that experience in AI and the experience in clinical operation. I wonder what company has that, but but I think definitely that's what we see. We've seen, just to be a little bit more concrete in regards to what. There are vendors that are using AI to do document recognition. So you upload a document into the system and it auto files it by recognizing what that document is. But it's really limited to that step. And then there's still that human component that has to confirm that what you're seeing is there. I think we could go further than that. We could use that same technology to drive processes. Validating the documents. They could keep track of the documents, could initiate updates of the documents as well, and that could all be automated and remove some of the workload that needs to be done just by using AI.
That's great. Maybe Jason, from your side, working broadly with technology companies, working through a platform like Click that could bring in vast amounts of data from a variety of sources, but now also has these co-pilots and these chatbots and auto ML and LLM capabilities. Where do you think, or where have you seen companies starting to leverage, perhaps related to clinical research or maybe pharma in general?
Yeah, so I think like that a theme that I'm kind of already hearing and from Pascal and Robbie is that, I mean, if you think about it, even just say 2 years ago, even some of the more forward technologies with AI, like predictive analytics, machine learning, which has been around and relatively trusted for a good handful of years, versus the Gen AI side of the world, where you're trying to just bring in all this unstructured data and hopefully get answers from it. So people that were starting to use AI in the clinical trial pharma space, where, I mean, 2 years ago, it was just dabbling, right? You were kind of giving the wizard these different products and hoping that wizard was going to produce something, but there was a lot of man behind the curtain and not a lot of transparency. So I kind of see it as twofold, especially where Click is hopefully forward in the AI world, where, under the AI umbrella, technologies that people are using today are twofold. One, it's the predictive analytics side of the world, so trying to get answers from all of the standard analytics that organizations are using, trying to understand patient behavior, trying to understand what drugs end up leading to be successful versus not. And now there's a big race too for the unstructured side. So the chat GPTs, Click has a product now called Answers, where you can ingest these large amounts of unstructured data, which goes wildly untapped, depending on your opinion. It's 60 to 80% of data can be sitting in the unstructured world. So getting people to get hands on those thousands and thousands of documents and get contextual answers, that's what people are striving for, because it's ultimately, how can we get a forward-looking answer into the hands of in front of eyeballs that need to see it as fast as possible, but now as accurate as possible. And I think one of the benefits I see of today's technology from 2 years ago and 3 years ago is there is a lot of transparency in predictive analytics, and now moving forward with the generative side of the world. Yeah. So.
And we've been mentioning these document summarizers, parsing through unstructured data. Sounds like smart search, right? Like, this is what Google does, but I feel sometimes that it does take an incremental step forward, because you can ask it for insights. You can ask for, analysis that the LLM can process from those. So I'm curious, Pascal, if in regards to, screening and recruiting patients, if you see a use case for AI where it takes all the information and the data that we have, but takes the next step forward to drive recruitment via avenues like content creation, patient outreach. Like, it helps in these mechanics as well.
Well, I think there's two levels to your question. The first one, we could look at the site level, so where the patients are actually being treated. They have databases of patients that are there. So definitely AI could help to identify patients. We could come in and just plop in inclusion exclusion criteria, and they could go through medical files and say, listen, these are the patients that are eligible for your study within your clinic. But definitely there's an avenue that will save a lot of money and efforts to try to recruiting treating patients. So that's one. But at our side and in clinical operations per se, just to give you a quick answer, we used a study recently where we employed services of a company that did recruitment. So what they did is they created content, they put it online, and then patients that liked it clicked it, and then someone called them, and the delays that comes with. And in the end, they were recruiting subjects and then sending them to the site for them to be recruited. Now that costs more than treating the patient. So when you think about it, just that service could all be automated. Content creation with bots, with everything. I think there's definitely somewhere that we can go with AI that can actually reproduce this at a fraction of the cost. And in the end, it'll do it faster, and it will do it more promptly. And I think when it comes at the end, having non-qualified people asking questions and regarding inclusion, exclusion criteria and finding out, I think the faster we get that patient to the site, I think the faster he comes onto the trial. And that would be I think, just that little level. I think there's other options and there's other things that I could come up to, but that's a simple applications that we could use AI for.
No, most definitely. I mean, Robbie, you mentioned, drug discovery, condensing the timeline from years to 11 months. I mean, to me, that's like, are we done? Like, that's it, right? Because that's like pretty significant. But are there other avenues where AI has provided such returns and insights?
Yeah, actually, yes. Specifically, there's several possibilities, so I cannot cover everything, but I will just specify two maybe experiences in innovating specifically for drug designs. Now we are gathering the information regarding the patient from already known systems like the EMR or specific clinics. So the idea maybe is to come out of these systems and to go through the social networks where some hot topics can be essential by providing very important discussions regarding symptoms. And it can be very helpful to identify what are the different needs of the populations by also considering the diversity, because so far the most of clinical trials are done in several regions in the world with a specific ethnicity population. So we have maybe in other regions in the world more expectations in terms of symptoms and medications coverage. So this is how to identify maybe the hotspots and the opportunities to innovate to drive the pharma policy, but also now more specific and more deeper than that is to provide also the combination between now a very huge amount of data and several types of data from clinics, genetic data, proteinic data, and the AI can now provide more personalized drug discovery by providing more comprehensive and understanding of the chemotherapy and the chemical architecture of receptors, of proteins, of biology, and the prediction of the response of a subject or of a group of a subject for a specific drug. So it will be deeper than understanding the expectation of the population, but it will be more personalized and more concise. And this is what mentioned Pascal, because if we are talking about personalized medicines, so we need to reduce also the cost to design, but also to manufacture those products, because they are specifically meant to very small populations. And we need to automate at maximum as possible the whole process to reduce all the costs and to make the drug affordable to the final population.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we should point out, so we have this notion going back to the Watson days. Watson was like sold to all the hospitals, and where's it at now, right? Is it, Texas AUM hospital using it down south? No, because there was like a level of promise that hasn't been realized, and I think inherently because of the technical architecture of that solution. Whereas now with these chat bots, I do think the major pharma companies are building their own chat GPTs. Like chat GPT itself is not going to provide personalized medicine recommendations to you. It shouldn't, because it's a general model, right? But companies are leveraging these architectures and training it on their own data. And one way of doing it is through that RAG architecture, but really retraining the model on specific uh, proprietary data to do these types of recommendations. And I think because the models are so good at suggesting the next step, it's not just summarizing, but it's like, what is the next step? That it really is a transformative time. I'm curious, Jason, how you feel that Click in particular is well positioned to essentially market and democratize the use of these models, because it's not easy. You can't retrain an LLM, but it seems like the mechanics of accessing and using them are becoming
Yeah.
commoditized.
Yeah, so one of the nice things in that Click is doing, part of the acquisition of the company I worked for, which is a predictive analytics company, to a recent acquisition of a company called Kindy, that are now making these solutions more plug and play. Because at the end of the day, what people want to get to, as actually the CEO of Kindy, his name was Ryan Welsh, and they're now a big part of Click, and that's our answers engine, our Gen AI piece, is people just simply want an answer engine, right? Ask a question, whether that's of predictive analytics, whether that's of Gen AI, and to be able to contextually or with structured data, be able to faster get those answers so people can be more efficient. So you've mentioned RAG a couple times. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with retrieval augmented generation, but some of the latest and greatest technologies, including a Click Answers, even a Copilot, is now taking your contextual information. So while the chat GPTs and those GPT models are great, realistically, the most recent GPT models are 2 years old. So they've only been trained up until probably maybe early 2023, right? So if you're asking a question of patient information or documents or contracts or prescriptions, it's not going to be able to give those answers out, right? And what ChatGPT might do is it will hallucinate, right? It will essentially give a confident answer that actually happens to be correct. So what's nice about these RAG systems is that it will not only give you the correct answer, but it's citing the source, right? So making sure that people can understand the technologies. I don't know if we've said the word trust yet, because I know we haven't quite gotten to that section, and we'll segue in there, but that's a big piece, is being able to trust these technologies. So companies and organizations like Click have now these tried and true systems of explainability, of trust, traceability, all the way from inception of where did this data start and how can we validate the predictions, or how can we validate the response that comes from essentially these RAG.
We're in the trust nest. It's okay. We could say the word. For us, it's been the biggest blocker to adoption. Do you want a customer service agent, patient recruitment agent out there in the world that's ungoverned and you have no way to double verify exactly what it's sending out? We just cannot put such solutions out there, right? So the reason we also now spend a lot of time with document chatbots, they're internal facing, they're kind of safe. They still provide some value, like putting a document chatbot on top of your SharePoint is no small thing. Like you could gain a lot of that, especially if you ask it to then generate new contracts or new documents or new patient summaries and records based off what it knows, right? So I think trust is the name of the game. It's the number one kind of blocker that we've seen. So anything that helps with governance and explainability, and making that commoditized so it's easy to access is absolutely required. And then since we're moving into the trust discussion, regulations and compliance, I mean, there's two questions that pop up to my mind is, even if we could, should we, is it ethical to optimize clinical trials based off, what a model tells us? And also, is it, what are some of the regulatory challenges in ever doing some of these things? So I don't know, Pascal, maybe we could start with the regulatory challenges. Like, what are some of the blockers to adoption? lack of precedence or anything that could be.
Well, I think definitely when we talk about data and we talk clinical trials, we talk about personal data. So definitely, being able to ensure that we're compliant with, PIPEDA or HIPAA compliance, that's definitely something that's going to be important because if we're looking at patients and at the medical care facilities, they'll have access to a lot of that information. And if we're looking this where they're connected to a clinical trial as well, ensuring that everything is still, compliant to the Personal Information Acts. So that's definitely things that we have to look at. But I think you bring on another subject as well, is that with predictive algorithms and giving access to our clinical trials to study, we might be surprised, that with information about disease and how people respond to it, eventually, AI is going to be able to know and unblind studies. And then what do we do with that information? What do we do with, if we know that tomorrow this patient is on the active compound and he's not responding? Do we remove him? Do we even leave him there? So I think there's this whole thought pattern that we need to be present and to think of, that what will we do with the information that we'll get? Because we'll be surprised by, most likely, the information that we'll get by looking at data with the help of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I will add also that even the regulatory agencies, the European Medicine Agency and the FDA themselves, they are learning from the experiences already, and they do not have a very specific and accurate regulation process to validate these projects. So everybody is discovering and is learning from the experience and from the ground, because we have several issues in terms of ethics. If I already know your profile as a subject, so if I'm a producer, manufacturer, I can predict in future a new innovative drug that in 20 years you will need it. So is it ethical to do it and to have this information? Also, we have issues regarding the now the data feeding the AI development, because so far, as I said, we are using specific clinical trials, we are using specific population, we are using even within the disease, we are using controlled trials. So we are not covering the whole data set of all the population, the general population of the disease. So how come we can predict any in action or in solution to manage the clinical trial, to predict the subject or occurrence of an outcome based on already biased the data set? So this is another issue that we need to consider in this topic.
And the last little bit I'll mention there is I think it's a conversation, and while I'm not necessarily a clinical expert, Click works with obviously all organizations, whether it's pharmacy, clinical trials, FinServ, whatever you name it, right? That's doing analytics and trying to do AI. The bias question and the bias conversation is something that we just need to be forward with, right? And model bias, especially if you have a specific population and you're training it on specific genders or demographics, right? If you're training a model on that information and all of a sudden you open up the predictions to essentially a population, a data set that is different than that profile, it's going to bias making predictions, right? And giving these answers in a way that's, that's essentially not right. So I think it's just something that we have to continue to talk about now that the data does get more transparent, right? The predictive models have these tried and true, now trusted algorithms. There's data on the back end, explainability down to, especially in Click, down to the record level. We're making these predictions. These are the drivers. Here are the data points and all the statistics that go behind it. And it is by no means perfect. Again, we're now, I would say, into the middle years, hopefully, of people starting to see now, again, we're not just working with these neural networks that are just spitting out these predictions and you have no idea essentially where they came from. I think one of the themes for me and today, and as we've talked over the last few weeks, is obviously starting to trust the process, obviously asking questions of the new technologies that you're looking to attach to and help to essentially get you down the road to where you want to be. So, but
I think that's key, whether it's machine learning or Gen AI, has to be explained. I mean, you can ask ChatGPT, how did you get this answer? It'll give you like a pretty good analysis. The machine learning side, we cannot roll out a model into deployment, into production now without that explainability feature, because we have to be accountable for why did it make this prediction? And then also people want to know, what can I use it for and how can I optimize and improve, which the model also tells you how to do. But I think it's critical point that you make, that it has to be from step one part of the process. But I'm curious, we talked about the clinical research operations side. We talked about drug discovery, which was close to my heart, related to my PhD work. But what about for the patients? Like, how can an AI embedded in the clinical trials process, like, help the patients or improve patient outcomes? What are some ways we can do that?
Well, definitely keeping patients engaged. Yeah, one of the things is with the use of AI and the information, it could keep patients engaged. It could recruit them, but once you recruit them is one thing. Keeping them on the trial, helping them, in everyday context. Don't forget your appointment. There's so many applications that we could use, bots for, just to keep patients engaged into the study and think, oh yeah, I'm in this study, I have to go see the doctor, so to keep them there and give them information, and the relationship between the site, the investigator, and this, and there's definitely a lot of applications that can be done from AI and in that perspective. The second thing is that, in the patient's care, AI could assist physicians in treating their patients. A lot of times when you go on site, and I'm dedicated. So in my earlier life, I used to be on clinical sites looking at data. And a lot of times I could see trends from their patients that they didn't see because they don't have time. They have 20 minutes or 15 minutes to see their patients. They didn't have time to go through the data, but I did. And I found things. So imagine what AI could do. And say, listen, have you looked at this trend? So there's so much information. And I think we were talking, Rabbi and I, that, in other applications, we've seen, applications being used, and it was so beneficial for the patient, it became a medical way of treating patients. Now they're using these tools to treat patients instead of doing just clinical trials. So definitely there's an added value to looking at, one, keeping the patient engaged, and then assisting physicians in patient care.
Would there be any pushback to that from the patient side? Are there, the non-adopters are like, I don't want to deal with a real person here?
Yeah, I think definitely there would be, the older generation that's not used to all the applications and doing just right now when we're using electronic diaries, if the patient's 80 years old, for some patients, it's a challenge. So, being engaged by a robot, and there's definitely a lot of pushback that could come from certain generations. But I think as we evolve, a lot of people will catch on.
I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, I think so.
As much as AIs hallucinate, I think their use is like inevitable. Let's maybe move to the sort of the future outlook. We talked a little bit about how AI can be used on the operations side, how data can be leveraged with AI to drive new insights. Where do you all see AI in clinical research evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, we didn't talk about a lot of other aspects like monitoring and project management, project oversight that can be done with AI. Right now, we're dependent on reports that are programmed and are there. Having AI available helps you with data mining, helps you with, questions. How many protocol deviators do I have? This site, how is he responding? So looking and developing a matrix for your studies, definitely a lot easier with AI than it is with reports that are programmed and that you're dependent on what's been programmed. And when you want something new, it takes 4 to 6 weeks for people to program it and for you to get an answer. With AI, you have a new questions, you'll get the answer right away. So definitely there's an added value to that. But this will generate change. And change will be definitions of employees. What type of employees do we have? What's their roles? As AI is going to integrate into clinical trials, we'll have to reimagine how we do studies. How do we manage them? Do we need to go on site? Do we need to do monitoring? Could we assemble certain roles like monitoring and data management and combine them together? That will save. In the end run, you know what that does is it makes it cheaper, it makes it faster, and makes drugs accessible to patients more rapidly. So definitely there's an added value to working in that sense, but there's a lot of change coming forward. And there's this scare of losing jobs and not being able to adapt. And so that's definitely the outreach that's there. But definitely for me, I think, AI could be a little bit what Ford and the assembly line. We had to change. We started doing, commercializing products differently because of, the way we've done things. And I think AI is going to be one of those.
Yeah, and I think what I've heard a lot, and typically when people will come, and we've already joked about kind of what can AI do for me? Just tell me what kind of AI you have and what flavor it is, and we'll see how we can use it. We always kind of start with what's kind of the problem you're trying to solve or the outcome you're trying to get, and it's typically one or two things. The problem we'll have, we're all revenue-driven organizations, so it's going to affect ROI in one of two manners. It's either going to essentially give some flavor of revenue gains, right, or it's going to be some flavor of efficiencies or cost gains. And when we're talking in the pharma and healthcare industries, a lot of times it's more of those essentially cost savings and efficiencies that ultimately give, of course, better patient care, but it also provides trying to get through this slew of massive data that we just cannot get through, right, with logistically now without some flavor of AI. So where people might be hesitant around, even my parents, who I've shown them ChatGPT, and it was really funny, that they understand now that when they go see their doctors, that all the medical records that they've had, think about how you used to have to get to that 20 years ago, 50 years ago, right? And mining through the documents and even getting those uploaded manually into an ERM system, right? And now being able to say, hey, we can go through and just ask a question of 20 clinical trials and all of that historic information and be able to just now be more efficient with essentially the processes. And while I think AI is kind of, some people think, come for some of our jobs, like our organization has seen it now very much plateau, where now there are more developers and there are more people obviously trying to build these technologies to hopefully assist in your organizations and doing what they want to do and being more efficient. So
it's a great point. Robbie, I mean, apart from accelerated drug discovery, like I said, where do we see it?
I think there's a very important segment, the more safer products, because so far the classic way to have the approval of a product, we perform all the layers of different clinical trials from phase 1 to phase 4, and even the PMS after the phase 4, the follow-up for post-marketing studies. But the AI can add another layer of prediction of safety by identifying maybe the more efficient dosage according to the patient profile. So it will be another aspect that we can add to the drug file for submission to have more accurate and precision in terms of dosage and efficacy, and taking in consideration the safety side of the drug. So we can maybe have several dosage according to the patient profile. So this is very essential, because at the end, what's the purpose of all of this? To have innovative drugs, to have to treat diseases, but in an efficient way, but also to prevent from any harm and any safety event. And this is all the philosophy of clinical research and drug discovery. So AI will improve our efficiency in identifying all the risks inherent to the drugs. And it will be, I think, according to me, the most priority that will be on the focus of all the regulation authorities all over the world.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Been pretty quiet. No? Yes, in the back.
So do you think it's one of the issue for the fact that we're not moving like in a better speed to get there and to have AI in first place? What's your
I think the main issue for this is the availability of the data. AI is based on data. So far, the most advanced experiences are those who found the data somewhere. So ChatGPT, we are talking about a source of information that feeds the data. But for clinical trials, it's a highly regulated sector. So access to we have the data. We have oceans of data. But it's salty. You are thirsty and you cannot drink that water. So it's very difficult to get access to the data. And this is the main challenge why we are still at the edge of, let's say, the finding the ways and the pathways that we can innovate. Because in technology, we have all the technology. They have let's say, as ecosystem. We have the ecosystem already ready for to handle the technology and development. But for me, this is the most important element, reducing and putting some limits to the development of the AI, specifically in our segment. We are talking about clinical research.
The data is typically the blocker. So being able to access, you have one organization that has their clinical trial and maybe, I don't know on average how many clinical trials come out each year for these organizations, but it's not a ton. So especially with like things like predictive analytics, if you don't have a lot of observations of something occurring, you're not necessarily going to learn the patterns. And so that's not to say that there isn't patterns to be derived from this data, but a lot of times transparently, sometimes IT can get in the way. Sometimes the trials are run in different segments, and sometimes, that data is not all in one place where two different governing bodies can agree to play nice and kind of allow all of that to be pushed into one place. Again, I certainly believe, and this is for almost all organizations, certainly in the clinical world, the pharma world, healthcare, financial, all more slow to adopt the AI technologies versus others, where the end result, if you were to do something incorrectly, right? If I predicted someone was going to respond to a marketing email, the ramifications of that false positive, right, are minimal. Versus obviously, if you're going to say a patient's going to react potentially to a drug in a certain way, and that's not correct. So I think one of the things, and we chatted on this a couple of our calls that we didn't mention yet today, is there's still a big human in the loop element that it is going to play into especially this world with AI, right? None of these decisions are going to ultimately get automated and pushed out without a scientist, a PhD, a physician that's going to review those results. So I think that that's a part of the process where I think some people get a little bit hesitant, but they kind of forget about, even in basic, essentially sales-based efforts, marketing-based efforts, there still is a little bit of a human in the loop. Here it's going to be a little more extreme. So there's still experts that have to come into play. But again, at least the theme that I see, having done this now for quite some time, is that people are starting to trust the technologies. You can talk to myself, others in the room that are using these new advanced AI capabilities, where there is transparency down almost to the record level of making predictions. And then on the RAG side, as we've talked about, traceability into understanding where did this information come from. So I think that's kind of the springboard for starting to trust. And then for those that may be keeping this siloed data, right, kind of separate from everyone else, and they don't want to share, where they're going to make it more accessible. So yeah, that's my 2 cents there. I was thinking it was 5 cents, but
I think there's a point where there's initially going to be an adaptation that we'll need to do, that, you know, clinical people will need to learn a little bit more of technology-based, you know, information and how to manage. Because even if you try to use Chat GPT, to give an example, you know, there's a way to ask something, right? There's a format to be there, that you have to be specific, and there's certain angle to do that. So people are going to need to learn, just like we learned how to use a computer before. You know, it's the same thing. There's going to be a transformation of the workforce, definitely. But in regards to the data, you know, most of the discovery that we do in clinical trials are done, you know, in biotechs, and biotechs have one molecule and they're doing one study. So, you know, it's very limited. I think where the avenue is that anyone that does discovery, they submit to a national agency and they have access to all the data, and it's going to be all pooled. So at that's going to be the opportunity, is for AI to be there at the national agency level and then be able to do discovery through there. So I think definitely, you know, I think there's going to be an avenue out there. And of course, you know, as soon as the smaller biotechs are bought or in co-venture with larger pharmas that have larger, you know, data pools, and there'll be more information coming. But it's going to get there. I think it necessarily, I think it's going to be there. The data's there, but where it is, that's not necessarily where the discovery is going to be done. I think it's going to be later down the road.
I'm just going to add that I also do think that the energy barrier for a clinical researcher with no formal coding training or background in computer science to start to build applications is coming down very fast, because a lot of capabilities are being commoditized, either out of the box or they're going to be part of Excel or Click, and the building blocks that you need to start to integrate AI with planning processes and get to the sense of agency, I think is far more accessible than what it was 8 months ago, when I have to write tons of Python code to get things to work. Yeah. Another question?
Hi. You hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you guys have folks online, so we use this. You touched upon it a little bit. I'd like to dig a little bit more about this this sharing of data, because basically the answers of so far have always been the proprietary aspect of everything. You know, decades ago, a company would have tens of thousands of compounds as a library. They keep it to themselves, but eventually they started to share, right? And I'm wondering, are we getting to a point where, like, the dam breaks and all the data is going to be like released, and it's actually the question that is the proprietary thing, that the question that you ask is the important part, and if so, what's keeping it in here? You talked about some, you know, privacy issues, probably laws and whatnot. Is there a philosophical, you know, aspect to that, like people just can't accept to share? What's that thing that's going to break and let loose, if you think that's going to happen?
Convenience. It's far more convenient to share data and accelerate, you know, patient, you know, diagnoses and things like that. Coming from the States, I live in the States. It's like one hospital region doesn't talk to the next, and you can't even share. It's the same. You can't share your medical records. Why not? I think those barriers will ultimately fall down from my perspective, just because of the driving force of convenience and the promise of what can be done if data sharing becomes more institutional.
I think probably it's going to come down to the regulators to impose it. A little bit like we did with clinical trials and sharing the results of data of clinical trials. So there's this website called clinicaltrial.gov where people actually post all their studies that are ongoing and the results and et cetera. The pharma didn't want to do that. It's the agencies that forced. And now today you want to submit a study to an agency, it has to be listed on that website, or else you're not getting approved. So I think there's going to be a need for, I think, national agencies to push, you know, data sharing. I think that's.
Yeah, but still we will have another a deep issue. Let's imagine we find a solution to break this silo between all the databases for drug design, for the drug libraries. they have already some databases that are available in the market, but from the patient data, as we said previously, it's a huge bias that we need to consider regarding these databases. Even if we have access to all the databases of all the world, we still are looking to specific patient profiles. So what are the impact on of this bias on the predictions and all the algorithms that we will feed and learn within these databases?
I was wondering if you ever thought that AI could one day become predictive or extrapolate based off of data. You mentioned that training biases inside the data sets can polarize maybe to specific demographics they're selected for in clinical trials. You think at some point the AIs can recognize and extrapolate off that data? Like say, for example, in a heart attack, men and women present differently with the heart attack symptoms. Do you think an AI could be able to say, okay, apply the male symptoms to a female and then realize, wait a minute, they're not matching up? Is there another potential explanation for this? Do you think an AI could ever make those kinds of leaps in decision making?
Yeah, in terms of clinics and let's say healthcare management, yeah, we're already at this step because we have already several tools and several AI agents already capable of predicting outcomes of subjects in several, specifically in radiology for the oncology discovery, but also in cardiovascular prevention. But sure, this is the dream.
And there's examples there too where that might be an instance of where you're actually separating models, where you're not wanting to necessarily train the same data set on females of a specific age, demographic, race versus males again of a similar scenario. So there's one where actually experts come into play and say, okay, these certain essentially patients present in a specific way, different from another, and those actually might be two completely different training data sets, because not all necessarily training data in the predictive sense is the same. But that's where you can start to dig in, talk to organizations, whether it's like ours or others, that can start to say, if you were to present this question and trying to have this specific answer, right, these are the types of data points that you would want to bring in. So it's all good stuff as people start going down the rabbit hole that are crazy valid questions where, yeah, there's already really good answers and solutions. It's just about, bringing in the PhDs to say, okay, this is the way you would go about doing it. So
I think as we're letting data sit with AI, I think we'll be surprised at results. There's a lot of information, for example, like PK reports and PD reports are often standalone reports. They're not necessarily keyed into the clinical database. Now, if AI will have the capability to look at that and to drill and mine data and to come up with assumptions that we haven't done in the past because we haven't looked at the data that way. So definitely having a fresh outlook of the data and a more larger span of the information, that definitely will be surprised with what we'll get out of the results.
Yeah, that's not a step too far. You just ask it, make a bias detection model. It'll just come up with the code for you now, right? And with the latest 01 release from OpenAI, I mean, it could like just plan out an entire initiative for you to mine through data and detect these things. I think like I said, to me, it's the energy barriers to using, and when we think of like making a model and integrating the results into another system, so I get a text alert about something, like all of these energy barriers are coming down. The building blocks are becoming commoditized. So I do think it's a very exciting time. And you could just ask the AI to detect its own bias as a solution. But you had a question as well? Yeah.
So in pharma market research, what we've been seeing a lot right now is the adoption of synthetic data and use of synthetic data. Is that even possible in basically in clinical trials and research on that front? And would that overcome the challenges of regulation?
So not being necessarily the clinical expert up here. So yeah, I mean, the challenges with anything with synthetic data is, right, are we seeing the same historical patterns based on essentially, the real world scenarios? So where you're essentially enhancing these data sets to potentially find more signal or find different patterns in these different segments, maybe that you broke it out or expanded into. So I mean, the data is only good as far as you can trust it. So so that's it. The synthetic side clearly gets a little wishy-washy in terms of believability, and I think that can only probably even more so downstream in the clinical world, right? Versus a sales-based organization, it could be an insurance organization, right? Yeah.
I think the protector of that is submitting the data to the agency. I think the ones you'll come with an initial information, they'll take it with a grain of salt. But as we submit more and more synthetic data, we'll be able to cross-reference it to other studies and and it will, gain, more notoriety over time. I think.
I think we need to reference the data sets from all over the projects, and it's like clinicaltrials.gov. We have results, but we do not have the data itself. And I think it would be a good way for national agencies all over the world to put it as a regulation. If you need to have your approval for a product, you need to submit not only the result, because at the end, I'm just reading the outcomes. I'm not sure. I'm not confident about the data set. I need to see it at my level. So I think we need to have a sort of national government decision on that. So this is now more challenge to start more projects on AI.
And I think one of the themes, and we see this a lot, is with the technologies that we have today, whether it's Click or any of the other kind of AI and BI groups, Click certainly thinks we're the best. Like the technologies actually are pretty simple now. And when I say that, the point being is that it allows you to fail fast, where you can take these data sets, whether you believe the data or not, toss them into a predictive analytics solution like an AutoML and say, go ahead and run this model, and do that literally within minutes, produce results, essentially all of the explanation behind that, right? And maybe you toss these data sets in and the models F1 score, if you will, right, is just garbage and it's terrible. It's 10%, 20%, right? It at least allows you to say, okay, this hypothesis on this specific question, right, regarding your industry doesn't hold water. There's not enough data. There's not enough signal. So I think that's one of the other benefits too of where AI has gotten to, even over the last 6 months, 8 months, 2 years, is these technologies now, instead of having to always have the applied mathematics PhD data scientist that could take weeks or months, now building these solutions, we've hopefully automated them to the point of allowing people that may have 10 different predictive questions or generative questions, right? And maybe 8 of those don't hold water, but now it allows you to get to those conclusions like extremely fast and again in a very explainable manner. So I think that's something to not get lost on the conversation. So
I have not had much luck synthesizing data to bolster the statistics myself, but the jury's still out because maybe, and then it has to be tested, I think, in real life. But upsampling and doing all those techniques have not yielded to me like fantastic results yet, personally. So, okay. Is that it? Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure to have you here. And let's enjoy some food and drink in the back, and be happy to carry on the conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you.